All right, let's go ahead and start with the Praise to Shakyamuni Buddha that's on page 73, 3 times in English. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. And go forward at 97 or 98 for the short mandala offering. We'll do this in English, as usual, with the offering mantra, and then refuge and bodhicitta once in English, twice in the Tibetan. This ground anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodang soki chok nam la, chang chu bardu dakni kyab suchi, daki chunyan gi peso nam gi, jola penchir sangye drupar shok. Sangye chodang soki chok nam la, chang chu bardu dakni kyab suchi, Daki chanyan gi besonam gi jola penshir sangye drupar sho. All right, let's do a short meditation then before we begin the class. So as usual, we'll spend a few minutes in focused meditation on the breath, just to calm the mind a bit, let go of whatever distractions we might have from our day, preoccupations, worries, whatever. And then after a few minutes in silence, working with the breath, I'll lead you in a short reflection to set your motivation for tonight. So I'll ring the chime to start the meditation. So to set our motivation for tonight, I thought we'd do a short reflection on this amazing opportunity that we possess at this very moment. And according to the Buddha's teachings, we've had countless lifetimes. And the majority of those lifetimes, we've been in states where there was just so much more suffering than what we're currently experiencing. The terror, the fear, the hunger, the thirst, all the things that come with the lower rebirths. That was what we knew when we were in those existences. Only small moments where we had any rest from that. But we've also been born at times in states where we've had much greater happiness, in terms of temporal happiness, as gods and demigods, the karma ripening for us to have a bounty of wonderful sense pleasures. And in either of those states, we lack what we currently have, which is kind of a balance between those two. This human life affords us enough happiness so that we aren't totally immersed in our suffering, but gives us a reminder of the nature of existence when we do suffer, when we do have difficulties, problems through illness, aging, and so on. For most of us in the room, we're nicely in that sort of zone between these two. So be very grateful that this is the time that you possess right now, is this life as a human, with all these conditions coming together. Not just having this human existence that affords us this opportunity because of this balance of pleasure and pain. But moreover, you've met with the precious Dharma, met with the teachers of this Buddha Dharma. You also have an interest, a desire to learn it and to practice. So all of this has come together. All the causes and conditions have been created for this very moment, for what you possess right now. So first, just feel incredible joy. And like a pauper who has found an unbelievable treasure. But with finding this treasure comes responsibility, because we have to do something meaningful with the time that we have so we don't leave this life empty-handed. First of all, to at least create the causes for a good rebirth. A lot of what we've learned in this course is to help us to have greater control over our minds so that we don't create negative karma and fall to the lower realms. So this is the first level of motivation that we can bring to this session to help make this time meaningful in this human existence. But we've also been learning how to get rid of the afflictions in their entirety, how to attain the state of liberation by knowing our own minds and being able to eventually develop the ultimate antidote, the wisdom of emptiness, that will undermine all of the afflictions, all the causes of our suffering, help us to attain a state of nirvana, peace. So this is the second level of motivation that we can bring. Again, another way to make this life that we currently possess incredibly meaningful, purposeful. But then we've also been learning how to advance and develop the virtuous mental factors so that we can actually create the causes, not just for our own liberation, but for the attainment of Buddhahood. This is the greatest purpose we can bring to this life and to this time we have together. By dedicating ourselves to achieving enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings, there is no greater goal. So hold that strong intention. Make this life and this time that we have together here tonight the most meaningful by being dedicated to using it to develop your own knowledge so that you can attain the state of Buddhahood quickly and lead each and every single sentient being into that same state. Okay. So we are nearing the end of this text, and as I said in the last session, since I think we have 4 more Wednesdays after tonight, I'm just going to simply extend some of the talk in the ending parts here, where we're getting into some of the instructions about how to use what we've learned, as well as a few of the topics that our author Yeshi Geltson on this concluding discussion, pages 87 and 88, he goes into all the things that time won't allow him to be able to, explore. He can't mention everything here, and that we have to kind of use our own pursuit of knowledge to get some exposure to some of these topics. So I do want to talk about a few of those. We did a little bit of that last time as well. As I recall, we were towards the top of page 87. We talked about these 2 modes with regard to the unspecified, the obscured, and the unobscured. Again, and just to reiterate that, I did have a little email conversation with Bob after that, because he had some confusion around what I was saying. So essentially what we can say, in the Prasangika Madhyamaka school, which again is the final word of the Buddha according to the investigations of all the great masters of the middle way. So essentially what they've discerned is that at the root of all of our suffering is this mistaken idea of how things exist, this ignorance that is incorrectly knowing things, not knowing the nature of reality, but moreover mistakenly thinking that things inherently exist. And moreover, the big one, the view of the transitory collection, which is when we observe the I that is merely imputed on the basis of these aggregates and think that that I exists inherently, intrinsically, from its own side. So that's at the root of all of our suffering. So essentially, when we talk about, actions that are obscured or afflictions that are obscured versus unobscured, we mean whether or not something, a state of mind, is together with any of these obscurations. And you can have the obscurations present in the mind, which would be like the view of the transitory collection. And on the basis of that, you can create unspecified karma, you can create negative karma, you can create virtuous karma. You can have a virtuous state of mind, a non-virtuous state of mind, an unspecified state of mind, all within an obscured mind. By obscured here, again, we mean whether you're together with ignorance, this deeper ignorance, or the view of the transitory collection. And why that is so is because, again, in Prasangika, we say that essentially all of those types of actions are going to be, unless you get to the uncontaminated realm, which is when you have the wisdom directly realizing emptiness, as long as you still have this ignorance present in your mind, you are going to have a contaminated action. That's what essentially Prasangika means by a contaminated state of mind or a contaminated action, is an action that is together with ignorance. So if you say ignorance is kind of the root of all of our suffering, well then we've got different actions that come from that. We can engage in some unspecified actions and unspecified states of mind, virtuous states of mind, virtuous actions, non-virtuous states of mind, and non-virtuous actions. All of that can arise within the sphere of this root of ignorance. And so it gains its flavor by virtue of what other things come into the mind. Ignorance in and of itself, in the view of the transitory collection in and of itself, are not non-virtuous. They're different than some of the other afflictions. Some of the other afflicted states of mind, when they're present, there's definitely non-virtue present. Like anger, attachment, most of the secondary ones, all of this, they flavor the mind in a non-virtuous way. But when you talk about these deeper errors that are going on, those, and it makes sense, because if you said that if they were non-virtuous by nature, then you could never even engage in the virtue that would lead you to the higher realms, right? Because you'd always have that ignorance, even when you're, practicing not killing or practicing, actions that will lead to a higher rebirth, generally. So this is kind of how it's set out. And again, when we talk about uncontaminated virtue, and you can only have uncontaminated virtue, you can't have uncontaminated non-virtue, right? Because it doesn't, if you have an uncontaminated mind, you have a mind that's not with ignorance, and none of the non-virtuous states of mind can be supported without ignorance. That's the whole idea behind this, is when we remove the root of ignorance, all the non-virtuous states of mind fall away, and all the karma created on the basis of them. Of course, all of the karma that you created with virtuous state of mind is still effective within samsara, but you have to create uncontaminated virtue as well, which will lead you to nirvana or enlightenment. Uncontaminated virtue is the virtue you create when you have had a direct realization of emptiness. So we're going to go into a little bit of this with the path, the Mahayana path, that I'm going to touch on the basis of some of these later bullet points that we have. But that's kind of in a nutshell what's going on there. Like I said, though, these unspecified that are obscured and unobscured are set out in the context of the Vasubandhu's text, the Abhidharma Kosha, and it just was a little complicated in the presentation there. But just know that, again, when you talk about an obscured mind versus unobscured, you're talking about whether it's together with that deeper error, ignorance, not knowing the nature of reality, or the view of the transitory collection. And then on the basis of that, you can have unspecified, but you can, of course, also have virtuous or non-virtuous, if it is obscured. There's one other thing I was going to say on that. I can't remember it right now. So, any questions up to this point, then? Everybody's kind of clear on how I explain that? Okay. So let's go on then. And the next bullet point says their individual drawbacks. Of course, here they're talking about the afflictions, the drawbacks of the afflictions. I don't know that I need to go into great depths on all of that. We can see, the disadvantages and drawbacks of many of these. They're presented in the Lam Rim frequently in regard to some of them. We know that anger, for example, in the course that we've been doing on Mondays, anger has many disadvantages, many drawbacks. It can, in terms of karma, this is the big one. We're not talking about that in the Monday course because I'm trying to kind of keep karma out of the picture to some degree, so people who don't have any conviction in karma can still gain something from the class. But the karmic ramifications from a mind of anger are pretty strong. You can actually destroy, roots of merit by virtue of a mind of anger when it's very strong. So we know that that's like at the extreme, but obviously anger can lead to many different actions on the basis of that. Verbally, physically, we can do a lot of things when we're driven by anger. We lose the clarity of our minds. We become incapable of making good decisions, don't have good rational thinking. We, again, will often say and do things that we regret, and that causes embarrassment. Could even, again, have ramifications in terms of future suffering. But then, of course, as we went through the course, we saw also the damage that pride can inflict upon us, jealousy, all these different things, attachment, all these states of mind, they do have their individual drawbacks. But all of them are part and parcel of what's keeping us bound in samsara, because they're all rooted in ignorance. Then the way in which they're abandoned by particular antidotes, I'm going to hold on to that point and cover it when we get to the summary, which starts on page 89, because as part of this, our author is giving us some advice on looking at antidotes. We've been touching on the antidotes as we've gone through the course, so I don't know that I need to do a lot of review of all of that, but I want to do at least one presentation on that to give you a framework for looking at how to work with antidotes in regard to the afflictions. And then it says, with respect to that, how they're abandoned by particular antidotes, the difference between the modes of abandonment by a mundane path and by a supramundane path was kind of interesting in the master's program. So many of us were really new to these words. We started using the term supermundane, which really isn't correct, right? Because super means kind of, escalated, exaggerated, so it's like even more mundane than mundane. Supramundane means kind of above the mundane, transcending the mundane. So a mundane path is something we've talked about on a number of occasions, which is where what you can do, and again, you really don't abandon the afflictions by virtue of this, but you do have an ability to suppress them to a great degree, to where they no longer become manifest as long as you keep that level of meditation up. And that was the process where we looked at developing what are called the 4 concentrations or dhyanas. These 4 concentrations are built on the basis of having calm abiding. So we've talked about calm abiding throughout the course, right? All the various faults and the states of mind that we need to use as antidotes to them. Calm abiding is a state that, again, in all the Lam Rim texts, it's set out in the great scope under the 5th perfection, the perfection of concentration. Lama Tsongkhapa has extensive instruction on how to go through developing the 9 mental abidings that get you to calm abiding. When you attain calm abiding, you technically have a form realm mind. There's the desire realm, the form realm, and the formless realm. What we are talking about in terms of these 4 concentrations are 4 levels of the form realm that you can go on to develop on the basis of calm abiding. So when you develop calm abiding, you're already at a pretty subtle state of mind where the afflictions are not manifest so much when you're in that. Nonetheless, you still haven't done any process to kind of separate from them, in a sense, to refine the mind a little bit more so that those don't become manifest. So what you do in the first concentration is you do this mundane this mundane meditation where you look down upon the desire realm and you see the faults of the desire realm, particularly the attachment and so on, and how coarse and gross that is. And you look to the first concentration and how peaceful that is in comparison. And you go through a process of mentally separating from that. And it's involved with what are called the 7 preparations, and it's very technical. But nonetheless, you go through this process and eventually you develop the first concentration. At the first concentration, you no longer have these manifest minds of the desire realm that are delusions, coming into your mind. They'll no longer be manifest. Doesn't mean they've been removed from the root. It just means that you've done something through your meditation that will keep them from arising, because you're hanging out in a first concentration realm mind, which is subtler than a desire realm mind, or even the calm abiding mind that you had that was a starting point. Then you go on to develop the second concentration by doing a similar process, looking at the first concentration and seeing the coarseness of that. And even though that's quite subtle compared to the desire realm and very peaceful, it's still quite coarse compared to the second concentration mind. And so you go through a similar process there. And then once you develop the second concentration, you do a similar process to get to the third concentration. Then you do a similar process to get to the fourth concentration. Those 4 are in the form realm. Those are the 4 form realm concentrations. They create an unmovable karma that will cause you to take rebirth in those realms if the conditions ripen for you to do that. It's what we technically do call immovable or unchanging karma. And that's because it only produces a rebirth in those particular realms. So if you develop the first concentration fully qualified, and you develop some time in that meditative state, when you leave this life, you could potentially be reborn in the first concentration form realm, an actual physical realm, where you have that kind of type of experience of that existence. It does have a body, but it's a much subtler body. Some of the senses are absent, they say, because you don't eat and do things like that. It's not a coarse body that you have in those realms. The second concentration realm is subtler, and third and fourth. But anyway, those are how you go through that process. There's another level, though, above that, which are called the 4 formless absorptions. And they start off with infinite space, where you look at the 4th concentration, you see it as quite gross. You see infinite space as being much subtler and more peaceful. And you move into that. And then you, after the first formless absorption of infinite space, you go on to infinite consciousness, where you think of everything as being consciousness, everything in the nature of consciousness, and the subtlety of that, and the peace of that compared to infinite space. And then you go to the 3rd level, which is nothingness. These get into really subtle states of mind. Again, they're called the formless absorptions because when you create an immovable karma to be reborn as a formless being. And of course, in Tantra, they say there's always a subtle form, which is the wind that goes with the very subtle mind. But nonetheless, you don't have a coarse body at all in the formless realms. So the product of all of that type of meditation is a rebirth in the formless realm where you don't really have any physicality that could be related to. So, there's no purpose in being born in the formless realm for a bodhisattva, because you can't teach anybody and you can't receive teachings because you're not embodied, they're not embodied, nobody else is embodied. You can't be on the receiving end or giving end of any of that. So as much as you want to help the beings in the formless realm, you don't have the means to. So nonetheless, you go on after nothingness to develop what's called with discrimination, without discrimination, or sometimes referred to when we talk about the realm, the peak of cyclic existence. You probably have heard this term. It's the peak of samsara. It's like the apex of how far you can get in terms of the subtlest state of mind where you have separated at that point. You no longer have manifest any afflictions of the state of nothingness, infinite consciousness, infinite space, the four concentrations, the desire realm. None of that is manifesting. So you have an extremely subtle state of mind. So in that state of mind, there's not why it's called without discrimination, not without discrimination, is that your mind is so subtle that it almost seems like there's no discrimination at all of anything. And yet there is a very subtle discrimination. So we can't say it's not, that it's without discrimination entirely. So it's without discrimination, not without discrimination. So it's a strange little place to be, I guess. And again, all the teachers I've had say we've had rebirth in those states countless times. And we've created that karma through developing these deep concentrations countless times in the past. We just never use them for anything more than a mundane path. Now, the way that I've heard it presented is that many people learn these techniques, and all these techniques can come from the Vedic traditions in India that were there, the Hindu tradition, what have you, that was what the Buddha learned from these great masters when he was Prince Siddhartha. And so it's been replicated in Buddhism, but of course the presentation is that none of those lead to moksha. They don't lead to liberation. They only lead to these subtler and subtler states of mind. And beyond the four form realm concentrations, the mind becomes so subtle that it's not so good as a basis for developing deeper insight into the nature of reality, for example. The fourth concentration is actually said to be the best for realizing emptiness on that basis. Nonetheless, you can realize emptiness directly with a mind of calm abiding, as long as it's united with special insight. You can do it with the first concentration, second, third, fourth. Beyond that, again, it does seem to be way too subtle of a mind to be able to do those deeper realizations, at least for most people, most minds. So how you go through, this was all an explanation of how you do it with a mundane path, is by going through this process. But you haven't separated from them entirely. You've only made them non-manifest. So when all of this process concludes, say you get all the way to that subtlest state, and you get reborn in the peak of psychic existence or wherever, and then maybe you drop item by item down all these various realms. Well, you end up back in the desire realm, and all the delusions are all still there. You didn't get rid of them, and they all become manifest again because you're not hanging out in those mind states anymore. So it's not really a very effective way to deal with things. It's useful in terms of calming the mind enough to be able to use it for a super mundane path, but it's not so useful in terms of getting rid of the delusions in their entirety just by virtue of a mundane path. A supramundane path is, of course, where you can unite it with an investigation of the Four Noble Truths, particularly the true path, that is the wisdom directly realizing selflessness, emptiness. And of course, that's where you develop, on the basis of these concentrations, your deeper insight, where it becomes a union of calm abiding and special insight, knowing emptiness directly. And then that would be how you actually remove them from the root. And we're going to go into that over the next several bullet points, because it says, with respect to abandoning them by a supramundane path, we need to know more about it, understand what are the objects of abandonment here, there, how they're removed as you move through the path, all this type of stuff. So the goal, of course, in Buddhism is to develop that supramundane wisdom. The mundane path is useful to a degree. Like I said, you'll have a much subtler mind at the fourth concentration than you have right now in the desire realm. You can't realize emptiness directly in a desire realm mind. It's just not possible. You need a deeper level of concentration to do that. So you need a form realm mind or above, again, calm abiding, one of the four concentrations. So any questions on that? Again, there is a wonderful book that's a little complicated at times, but it's by Lati Rinpoche and Dhammalotsa Rinpoche. Jeffrey Hopkins did the translation and provides some of the footnotes and things, called Meditative States. Might be out in the library. You might take a look at it, because it's a rather complicated tome it's not that big. It's about that big of a book, so it's not huge. And then there's another one that was made by, written by Leah Zahler, Leahzahler, I'm trying to think of the name of that one. I think it's just called Calm Abiding or something. I can't remember. I'm sorry, I don't remember the name of that one. It was, it's a nice book as well. And then of course there's one by, can't remember his name. I didn't bring that one. Something Lodro. Anyway, he it's called Calm Abiding and Special Insight, and that's kind of a nice book too. But maybe at some point, in terms of like these Wednesday nights, we've been mostly focusing on the basic program subjects, but it might be nice to do concentrations and absorptions, like just do a whole study of those with one of these books. It's very technical at times, but it's really useful to do. I didn't really know much about them until I went to the master's program, and we studied them extensively in the very first text that we studied there. So I could either use that as a basis, or because we've touched on it here and there again, and it came up in Ornament when we looked at chapter 4. It came up in a number of other places, but it'd be nice to maybe go through the whole text and have a deeper understanding of the preparations and how you attain these various concentrations. Might be quite inspiring. Yeah. So then it says in the next bullet point, moreover, with respect to these modes of abandonment by a supramundane path, the modes of abandonment of the objects of abandonment corresponding to the individual paths, the differences between the objects of abandonment of the paths of seeing and the path of meditation, the difference between the modes of abandoning afflictive obscurations and knowledge obscurations. I want to talk about all of these together as we go through the little handout that Amy has kindly made some copies of. Many of you have seen this chart before. There's a couple of versions of this. I think one I distributed once was like the one from Nalanda Monastery when they did the basic program. This is the one that was put together by, I don't know how they did this. This is like skills in Word beyond me. I mean, I could never do a chart like this in Word. This was done in Word by some of the students at the master's program. I think Emily Sue was involved, and Glenn Svensson. Pardon?
Word, like Microsoft Word?
They did it in Microsoft Word.
Wow, what a brain.
Pardon? In Excel, really.
Yeah, I could show you with a photocopier.
Oh yeah. I mean, I'd have to like probably get out pen and paper and ruler and what have you to do this, because I would be lost on a software program doing this. But so what I wanted to do was, I don't want to go through this entire chart. I did an evening up in Taos at City Garba where I went through this, and that was just before I left the last time. I think I went through all of that, and they found it quite useful, but it would take quite a while to go through that. Nonetheless, I do want to point out the major points of this. Most of you are familiar with the idea of these 5 paths. The paths, before I forget, what I wanted to do is, maybe for those who might be looking at this later, is to do a share of the path, the chart. Yeah, that works pretty well. It's not on the screen here, I don't think, but that's all right. We don't need to have it on the screen here, I don't think. So again, this is according to Prasangika Madhyamaka, which is the sort of final view, again, of what the Buddha taught in terms of the view of emptiness, in terms of how we progress through these various realizations. There are unique tenets to this school, but anyway, I want to move it down just a little bit on the screen here. Okay. So once that goes back up there, I think it'll be fine. Yeah, you don't have the Prasangika Madhyamaka at the top, but that's okay. So if you look at where it says path of accumulation on the left-hand side, path of preparation is followed, path of seeing, path of meditation, and then path of no more learning. These are the 5 paths. And essentially what we mean by the path of accumulation, Rinpoche these days calls this the path of merit. Because he says, sometimes we talk about merit and wisdom, but he says technically he thinks it's merit of virtue and merit of wisdom. So he says, like, there's the merit of engaging in virtuous actions, which creates a positive potential, but there's the merit of wisdom, which also creates a positive potential of your wisdom. And it is kind of an important distinction, because, for example, you know, when I was talking earlier about how anger destroys your roots of virtue, it destroys your roots of merit that are virtue. It doesn't destroy your merits in terms of wisdom, because it can't get rid of your realizations of emptiness, for example, or something. So anyway, just know that there are differences between these in terms of the terminology that's used. But on the path of accumulation, you're mostly accumulating those two, the virtuous merit that comes from your actions, as well as the wisdom, the merit of wisdom that comes from your study, learning, and so on. Prior to entering the path of accumulation, you'll notice there's 3 topics there on that left-hand side: great compassion, non-dual awareness, and mind of enlightenment. Great compassion is the root for the mind of enlightenment, bodhicitta. This would have been developed in a bodhisattva's mind well before entering the path, before becoming a bodhisattva. Obviously, the mind of enlightenment, bodhicitta, would also be a necessary thing in order to enter the path. You'll notice that demarcation number 2, where you enter into the path, is indicated in the milestones box there as uncontrived mind of enlightenment. For the sharp faculty trainees, though, the sharp faculty bodhisattvas, they will have an inferential realization of emptiness, this non-dual awareness, prior to entering the path. They say that the sharp faculty are called that because they're not going solely on the basis of faith. They want to know for sure that emptiness can be realized. They want to know that there's a way to achieve this result. And so they investigate emptiness before even cultivating bodhicitta in an uncontrived way, in order to enter into the Mahayana path. So there are 3 levels to the path of accumulation. I'm not going to go into all these 3, 4, 5, 6, these various demarcations, milestones along there, because these are not as essential when it comes to talking about what we're looking at in our text, the bullet points that have to do with these objects of abandonment, when they're abandoned, and so on. The path of preparation is called that because you're preparing to have your initial insight into emptiness. And so you are refining your understanding of emptiness. The demarcation, I will say what number 4 is there, that circle with a 4 that it indicates the movement from the path of accumulation to the path of preparation, is essentially when you have the union of calm abiding and special insight that's observing emptiness. And of course, it has to be the correct view of emptiness to get to that different level. So you would become a bodhisattva in the Prasangika Madhyamaka path of preparation when you have an inferential realization of emptiness. It's not yet direct, it's still conceptual, but it's done so through the force of the union of calm abiding and special insight. So this is already a very powerful realization. And again, that might have even occurred earlier on the path for those sharp faculty trainees. But that becomes the demarcation once you have a requisite amount of merit of virtue to enter into the path of preparation. The 4 levels of the path of preparation, you are refining your understanding of emptiness and making it stronger and stronger. And there becomes less and less of this idea of the subjective mind that is realizing emptiness, and emptiness the object that is being known. Eventually you get to that demarcation that's number 7 there, when you enter the path of seeing, and you're no longer at that level as you see towards the top, an ordinary bodhisattva. You become an Arya bodhisattva, or a bodhisattva superior. And this is because you've had your first direct realization of emptiness. Now this is again how the path is laid out for those bodhisattva trainees who never accomplished the Hinayana path. There's a similar Hinayana path looking somewhat like this in terms of 5 levels, 5 paths. And they would realize emptiness on their own, through their path. So if a Hinayana practitioner finished their path, became an Arhat, foe destroyer, and entered the Mahayana as a bodhisattva, they would have already done some of this wisdom work, right? They just wouldn't have done the virtue work, accumulating all the merits. And by the way, that top line that you have on the chart that shows the first great countless eon, second and third, that shows how much merit you need to have in the tank, your merit of virtue, in order to get to the next level. So it doesn't mean that you have to have accumulated it over a great countless eon, because it's the merit that is equivalent to that, and you can create it even faster. For example, in the tantric path, that's why you can attain the enlightenment in a single lifetime, is because the techniques that you use in tantra help you to accumulate that merit even quicker. So that shouldn't freak you out. I mean, on the sutra path, yes, it sometimes can take a long time. That's why tantra is encouraged. But nonetheless, that's just the demarcation for that. Okay, so let's talk about when you get to this first realization of emptiness. At that point, when you enter the path of seeing, you'll notice that there's those herringbone things that are there. There's ones that are going down, and then there's ones that are going up from left to right. If you look at the bottom, there's a key for that. The ones that are going down from left to right are the uninterrupted path. The ones where the diagonals are going up from left to right are the path of release, or what's sometimes called the liberated path. So what happens is, when you go into this meditative equipoise, and let's say you do have the basis of this fourth concentration, or some level that's, again, quite subtle, you have already then a union of calm abiding and special insight. You've been observing emptiness repeatedly through the path of preparation. There's a point where you come to where that mental image of emptiness completely falls away. Emptiness in the mind knowing it. I've used this phrase a zillion times. It's said in all the texts. Become like water poured into water. So there's no longer any differentiation of the subjective mind knowing an object. The object and the subjective mind become as one. In the space of that, you don't have any other conceptual minds appearing. Conceptual minds are completely gone. And there are no other objects to that mind other than emptiness. So even though, we can say it's this moment in time that you will experience and go through, all that is being held in the mind is emptiness directly. That acts as the antidote. And all the herringbone things that are there for the remainder, they're all similar in that they are all a similar thing of going into meditative equipoise and realizing emptiness in a non-conceptual way. And each of those acts as a direct antidote to abandon some level of the obscurations. So let's talk about that first one, when you enter the path of seeing. And that's what actually the liberated path is. The uninterrupted path is where you're generating the wisdom that acts as an antidote to it. The liberated path, they said, is like you've closed the door so that it won't ever return again. So you are immediately kind of getting rid of it with the first one, and then it's like shut off. The cessation has actually occurred then. It no longer will occur. You'll never degenerate to having that level of delusion, affliction in your mind again. So first, let's talk about where we are abandoning the afflictive obscurations, because as you can see, you go on then with your second direct realization, that second set of a herringbone thing, that begins your path of meditation. When you develop an uninterrupted path at the very end of the first ground, that moves you from the path of seeing to the path of meditation. So you have in total, 10 that are there, right? You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then your final one will take you into the path of no more learning. So you have 10 grounds. You enter into the first ground on the path of seeing, and then you exit the first ground once you've begun the path of meditation and develop that uninterrupted path that generates the liberated path. So what's happening is essentially until you get to that line that is indicating the beginning of the pure grounds, and there's a number 8 down below in the circle, till you get to essentially the end of the 7th ground, you are working on just what are called the afflictive obscurations. So let's go to the box down there where on the right-hand side where it says obstructions abandoned. You have afflictive obstructions. Those are the ones to liberation. And we'll talk in a moment about the acquired versus the innate. But let's go to what it says for afflictive obstructions. It says the conception of inherent existence and its seeds. Now again, that's the main thing. All of the other afflictions would be included in this, right? Because they're all part of that. They're built on the ignorance that misperceives reality. But by seeds, we mean the propensities for those to arise again. So all of that are what obscures you from liberation, obstructs you from liberation. They are afflictive obstructions or obscurations. They are what the person on the Hinayana path that I just talked about, when they do their path, that's all that they're removing, are the afflictive obscurations, because that's all you need to attain liberation. Sounding like it's not very much. It's huge to remove all of that, right? Because we've had all these since beginningless time. But nonetheless, that's what happens for the Bodhisattva on the first 7 grounds. On the first ground, when you enter into the first ground, you are removing only the innate. Only the acquired. The innate you start to remove when you get to the end of the first ground. You create the uninterrupted path. You have the liberated path on the second ground, and that is the beginning of removing levels of the afflictive obscurations that are innate. So what do we mean by acquired versus innate? Sometimes they even use the phrase intellectually acquired. Innate are those that are inborn. By inborn, we don't mean inherently there. I mean, they're baggage that you're carrying from life to life. But that baggage, again, can be removed from the mind. What we mean, though, is that idea that these are what you have brought with you since beginningless time. So they are a kind of a perpetual sort of thing that is there, that is inborn, that you strengthen through the force of your own adherence to that, but then it continues on into future lives. However, we do acquire some in our lives when we use our thought processes, our conceptual mind, to assent to inherent existence and so on. And so intellectually acquired are those that we generate in this lifetime versus innate, which is what we brought from other lifetimes, we have brought into this life. So the vast bulk of them are from other lifetimes because we've had countless lifetimes. That's why it takes so much longer to remove all of those. Now again, they're set up into 3 levels of big or coarse, medium, and the subtle or small. And then each of those is big, middle, small. So you have the big of the big, the middle of the big, the small of the big, then you have the middle of the, or the big of the middle of the middle, the small of the middle, then you have the big of the small, the middle of the small, and the small of the small. So that makes 9 levels. So you wonder, okay, how do 9 levels get abandoned now on 6 uninterrupted paths, right? Because there's one that takes you to the second, one that takes you to the third, one to the fourth. There's 3. 1 to the 5th, 1 to the 6th, 1 to the 7th. Oh, I'm sorry, and then there's 1 to the 8th. There's 7 of them in total, right? So what happens is that on the first 3, the second, third, and fourth, you are taking out the big of the big, the middle of the big, and the small of the big. So by the time you get to the 5th ground, you have removed the big level of these, which includes 3 of the 9 levels in total. Then when you do the 5th, 6th, and 7th, you are removing the big of the middle, the middle of the middle, and the small of the middle. When you move from the 7th to the 8th, and you remove, you attain what's called, again, the pure grounds, you remove all of the small in one fell swoop. You have a pretty strong mind by that time, and those are much subtler, but they're also easier to remove through the force of your meditation. So what do we mean by those? I mean, it's really hard to say. I've, when we studied it, I heard the terms, but I still couldn't really imagine what these are. The best way for them, they always kind of use this analogy of like removing a spot from cloth, right? The first time that you wash it, the grosser stuff comes out, right? Like the big dirty areas that are a little bit easier to remove. But then you have to use more and more effort and detergent to get the subtler and the subtler ones out. But nonetheless, when you get down to the very subtle, it kind of gets all removed in, I guess, one fell swoop through the force of all the additional work that you've done. So the analogy works to some degree, but I don't know that it works completely. But this is how they divide these up. And so by the time you get to that demarcation number 8, which if we look at our little table or chart there, there's a word, a legend. Is that right? Is that the right word, a legend? You actually attain liberation at that point. Technically, we could call the Bodhisattva a foe destroyer then, because they have done the equivalent work to somebody on the Hinayana path. The person on the Hinayana path, their path of no more learning is where they attain arhatship or foe destroyer, because they will have done this work of removing all the afflictive obscurations. So the Bodhisattva, when they become the 8th ground Bodhisattva, they at that point no longer have any manifest or seed afflictions in their mind. None whatsoever. So they've removed all of that. They can no longer, of course, have any level of delusion appearing in their mind. What is remaining for them to remove are what we've been calling the knowledge obstructions. So once more, we go to that little chart that's down there at the bottom. And the knowledge obstructions, those that are obstructions to omniscience, refer to, as it says there, the appearance of inherent existence and the stains or imprints of conceiving the two truths as different entities, or of having this kind of dualistic mind. So I've mentioned this in many other occasions, but recall that there's the apprehension of things, the conception of things as inherently existent, but then there's the appearance of them as inherently existent. And how I've always talked about how Rinpoche emphasizes this, that these two kind of play a role. When we first learn what things are, we learn the label for them, but then the label seems to absorb into the object and appear back to us as if it's inherently existent. That's what these imprints cause, is for things to appear to exist independently on their own. Again, the appearance isn't out there, though. Don't think it's on the object, like, I'm holding my hand up here, that my hand is somehow got this appearance with it. It's in my own mind. This is an imprint in my own mind that causes everything to appear to inherently exist. Then I'm grasping at that through my conception of inherent existence. So when we delineate it this way, these are the afflictive obscurations. My grasping at it as inherently existent, and all the delusions that follow on that, and the seeds to have that arise, that mind. When I remove all of that, I still have the appearance. The appearance is there, and it will be, to the mind of the bodhisattva, there'll be no conviction that that appearance is correct at all. Whereas ordinary beings, it seems correct and they adhere to it as correct. Because it's appearing that way and they're adhering to it, they just keep strengthening this dual process involved in the delusions and what have you, and being in samsara. So for the bodhisattva who's a pure ground bodhisattva, they've removed all of the ignorance and the afflictions, everything that we've talked about in our mental factors study, right? All of that has been removed. They no longer have the 20 secondary afflictions, the 6 root afflictions, all of that is gone. What is appearing to them still is this false appearance of inherent existence that is what's blocking you from knowing the two truths simultaneously. It's what's blocking you from omniscience. That's why these are called sometimes obstructions to omniscience. It's even in the parentheses there down in the box, knowledge obstructions or obstructions to omniscience. So while the first ones obstructed beings to attaining liberation, these are what obstruct you from obtaining Buddhahood, omniscient state of a Buddha. So we could say technically that the bodhisattva, she or he, this is their main object to remove, right? That's what they want to remove because they want to become a Buddha. But they have to remove the afflictive obscurations first, because those are clouding the mind first, and you want to get rid of all of that, and then you can work on the subtler. Just like we looked at in the process of the afflictive, needing to remove the coarser ones and eventually getting to the subtler ones. It's similar here. You have to remove the afflictive obscurations. The bodhisattva at the 8th ground, at that circle number 8 down below, where it says they've attained liberation or foe destroyer, that's great, but that's not their goal. They just kind of pass through that and continue doing the work. And it's at that point they begin building their 3rd great countless eons worth of merit, because they need a huge amount of merit to attain Buddhahood, to enter the path of no more learning. So we could similarly divide the knowledge obstructions into 3 levels, the big, the middle, and the small, and they are removed as you go through the 8th ground into the 9th into the 10th, and then the 10th into Buddhahood. There's no 11th ground. 11th ground is Buddhahood. Path of no more learning means that you don't have to learn anymore. You can hang up your school books and all the other stuff. You've attained that result. So in terms of our text and what we've studied, when it says here, that you should know, what becomes, what corresponds to individual paths, when you're going through this process of removing the afflictive obscurations, we can say that you do remove them in those various levels. I think we went into some studies where you kind of talked about which ones are removed more quickly than others, because some of them obviously, like afflicted doubt. I mean, who would have afflicted doubt beyond that first? Once you get your direct realization into emptiness, that's gone, right? You don't have any doubt because you're already there. And I think there's another one that gets removed like right from the beginning almost, So it seems like there are some variations from delusion to delusion, but nonetheless, all of them would be gone by the time the bodhisattva achieves the 8th ground, whereas for the foe destroyer, they would be gone by the time they attain the path of no more learning. And again, they do divide up for the Hinayanists. They divide up theirs into these levels too. We don't talk about the grounds or bhumis with regard to them, but nonetheless, they do go through a process of gradually abandoning and entering into the state of foe destroyer. As I mentioned before, once they attain the state of foe destroyer, they will exit the body that they attain that with. If it's a human body, they will leave that life, and they abide in some sort of mental state in a very subtle body somewhere, and the Buddhas keep sending out kind of rays to help waken them from that and move them into the Mahayana path. But until they're ready to receive them, they don't kind of get awoken from that solitary peace. And then once they have gotten that admonition of, sorry, you can't hang out here any longer. You've got to go enter the Mahayana path. The work's not all done. Hate to tell you, get to work. You've been lazing around all this time. You could have been working on the Mahayana path all this time. And that's why, again, they do say that if you were originally inclined to the Mahayana, but you fell to the Hinayana, completed the Hinayana path, checked out and abided in solitary peace, then got beckoned back into the Mahayana and had to go through all of that, it would take you so much longer than if you just entered the Mahayana path right from the get-go. So this is kind of the warning that they always give, is kind of to encourage us, especially if we are really motivated to practice the Mahayana to benefit others. Well, why would we want to take so long getting enlightened? We want to get enlightened as quickly as we can to benefit them. So maybe are there any questions on this chart? Again, there's a lot of little bits on there in that legend for the milestones, but I don't know that I need to go through all of those. Again, they use the terms Buddha superior for the path of no more learning, or Arya Buddha. It doesn't mean that it's a Buddha only with the level of realization of an Arya. Arya just means a superior being. And all the beings who have a direct realization of emptiness and above are superior by virtue of that. They're superior to an ordinary being. So that's, oftentimes they use the term Buddha superior to refer to the person who is a Buddha. Again, person is totally legitimate to talk about a Buddha. Sentient being is not an appropriate term for a Buddha. Sentient beings are not enlightened, whereas Buddhas are enlightened. But nonetheless, the word person can be used to refer to a Buddha. Any other comments or questions? Or any comments or questions? Everybody's being really quiet tonight.
The only thing wrong with the path of no more learning.
Amy. Well, you would be able to teach me then. Amy was saying that the only disadvantage of being on the path of no more learning is she wouldn't get to study with me. But I said, you could teach me then. So
It's a deal.
Okay. All right. So let's go back to our little text here and see what else we have on this page. I think that covers, all the bullet points where, and then it says, and so forth. I guess I could talk about and so forth forever probably, but there's so many different aspects, obviously, that you could look at in regard to all of this. But, Geshe Gyaltsen's being kind and kind of addressing some of the main things where some of this study applies to. The whole purpose of learning all of this about our own minds, and especially understanding the afflictions and the virtues and what have you, is because this is what we want to do. We want to actually accomplish the goals that are set out on the Mahayana paths. So we know what we need to do to kind of move in that direction. Then he says in the next paragraph, however, since I cannot mention everything here, you must understand all of those that we just went through in brief, by carefully consulting first, in general, the stainless scriptures of the Muni, that's the Buddhist sutras, and the textual systems of the great trailblazers that comment on their intention. The great trailblazers are sometimes called the charioteers. Everyone know who those two individuals are? No, not Vasubandhu. He's mentioned in the next one, but one of the trailblazers is mentioned in the next paragraph too, and that's Asanga. Nagarjuna, yeah, Nagarjuna and or Nagarjuna. Somebody said that in Sanskrit, the emphasis is on the second syllable, and then, but when you say Nagarjuna, like I said, it almost starts to sound like you're from New York or something. Nagarjuna. That's maybe Jersey. It's more Jersey than New York. Anyway, Nagarjuna or Nagarjuna and Asanga are said to be the two trailblazers. Why? Because if we talk about, again, there are four main schools or tenet systems of Buddhism. You have the Vaibhashika and the Sutra school or Sautrantika. Those are said to be Hinayana schools. And so they took the core teachings of the Buddha, mostly deriving from the Pali Canon, but also, just kind of studies that were done on that basis, and they developed most of their philosophy around how to attain liberation. They do have a path to enlightenment, but they set out that really it's the rare being who comes along who wants to become a Buddha, because they don't hold to Buddhas being around in the same way that the Mahayana does. In the Mahayana, we say Buddhas are a continual presence in the world, right? And you don't become a Buddha just so you can teach for 45 years like Buddha Shakyamuni did and then exit, and that's the end of your influence. But in their thinking, that's actually what that is that rare person who wants to practice the Bodhisattva path, who wants to achieve the 3 great countless eons of merit, who wants to then teach the Dharma, begin the Dharma turning of the wheel of Dharma in a world system. In Mahayana, that's not the only thing a Buddha does. That's what a supreme emanation body of a Buddha does. But Buddhas are continuing to be active in the world. So the 2 Mahayana paths that set out a more extensive way to achieve enlightenment and also set out much more detailed teachings on emptiness not just of the person but of all phenomena, are the Chitta Mantra, the mind only, which is what a Sangha developed on the basis of primarily the Sutra Unraveling the Thought, and then the Prasangika and Svatantrika Madhyamaka, the middle way, the Madhyamaka school that Nagarjuna set out. Of course, it divided into these 2, Svatantrika and Prasangika, based on a bit of a debate between Bhavaviveka and Buddhapalita. Buddhapalita expounded upon Nagarjuna's text, the fundamental treatise on the middle way, and determined what became known as Prasangika, that particular view that was just a clarification of what Nagarjuna said. It wasn't really a new revelation, but it was asserting that. Bhavaviveka said, no, you're wrong, and took issue with Buddhapalita, and that became the Svatantrika branch of middle way. And then Chandrakirti came around and said, Bhavaviveka, you're wrong, Buddhapalita was right. So anyway, that's kind of the little history of these little characters that were involved in refining what Nagarjuna did. But Nagarjuna is said to be the trailblazer, or the charioteer of the middle way school, Madhyamika school. And the main sutra for that, I can never remember the name of it. It starts with the Avatamsaka Sutra, I think is what it's called. Anyway, there's, and of course the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, which are teaching the middle way fundamentally. But nonetheless, there is one sutra that's much more instrumental in setting out kind of the middle way path. So those 2 are the charioteers or trailblazers that comment on the intention of the sutras of the Buddha. And then it says, in particular, the texts of the 2, Asanga and his brother Vasubandhu, and they mean there in particular the texts that set out what we've been studying here, since these modes appear extensively in them, as well as the stainless excellent explanations of the foremost second conqueror Tsongkhapa. So a lot of what was mentioned up above, as well as a lot of what we studied in this text, is set out by Asanga in his compendium. It's the Compendium of Knowledge, I think it was called, the Abhidharma Sutra Lamkara or something. I can't remember the name of that one. And then there's the Abhidharma Samuchaya, I think is what it's called. I could be wrong on that too. I don't know the names of all these things. And then there's Vasubandhu's text, which is the Abhidharma Kosha. Abhidharma Kosha is the main one that's studied in the monasteries. This is what we studied in the master's program. It's said to be a lower tenet system because Vasubandhu himself started out as a Vaibhashika, the bottom of the rung in terms of the 4 tenet systems. He later became Sautrantika, and then it said that Asanga actually, there are views that he wasn't really a proponent himself of the middle way of Chitta Mantra, that he introduced the Chitta Mantra on the basis of those sutras where the Buddha taught that for his brother Vasubandhu, so that Vasubandhu wouldn't fall to a lower tenet system, so that he could be kind of in the Mahayana tenets. But anyway, I don't know again, you can't really say for sure what happened in the history of Buddhism and all these different studies. But so, of course, Tsongkhapa is mentioned there because Tsongkhapa elaborated extensively on so many of these different texts. And, he is generally expounding on the basis of the Prasangika Madhyamaka point of view. So that's pretty much everything in terms of the knowledge. Now we get kind of an interesting little verse. Any comments up to this point? Let's go ahead and read this together where he says, this is some verses from Yeshe Gyaltsen that he's giving us that kind of conclude the main part of the text. Having strongly tied us with thousands of nooses of karma to the prison of cyclic existence since beginningless time, The enemies who torture us with hundreds of unbearable sufferings and agonies are certainly the afflictions themselves. In the wilderness covered by thickets of cyclic existence, the intolerable thieves who steal even the slightest benefit and happiness and torment us without allowing a single moment's relief are just those afflictions. Alas, who is more foolish than one who holds this enemy from beginningless time as his dear friend, planting him at the center of his heart, but holds as enemies his kind father and mother sentient beings, the 6 types of migrators. Hey, instead, if intelligent, discerning people were to uproot the enemy of afflictions from their hearts and cherish their kind parents, planting these wish-fulfilling gems at the very center of their hearts, it would be far better. So, everyone agree? Concur? I don't know that I need to make any commentary on that. Obviously, this is just some wonderful advice from the author telling us that we need to reverse our thinking and not hold all these kind sentient beings as our enemy when that external enemy isn't the real enemy. The real enemy is inside our own minds. And in fact, we can say that the only reason for anything on the outside manifesting as an enemy is because of our own minds, because of our afflictions. So it's the afflictions that we need to be rid of, the afflictions that we need to exile, that we need to abolish, that we need to eventually completely annihilate. So this is, again, just some kind advice. And it is true that we probably spent more time on the afflictions than any other category of the mental factors, and that's because it is important to really understand them, to know them well. In fact, the format for some of what I'm going to share in the remaining parts of tonight and into the next session at least comes from a wonderful little Lojong phrase that's in the 7-point mind training of Geshe Chikawa. Many of you know this text. He has one of the verses, and I think this is in, I don't know if it's the 6th section, I think it's the 6th section, the 6th point of the 7 points. He says, train in the 3 difficulties. The 3 difficulties are, first, to identify the afflictions, kind of to know them when they're arising, to see them. And it is true because, as was said in that one verse, we see them often as our dear friend, especially attachment. Attachment seems to be like, oh, good, I get to find something pleasurable in my life with this mind of attachment. I need to get closer to it, to not get separated from it, to hold on to it, to keep experiencing it, right? This is what attachment convinces us of, is that that's so valuable to do that. Or even the mind of anger, that is our dear friend that keeps things out of our lives that we don't want, that makes us feel so much better because we've told that person off and gotten them to shut up, or whatever the case might be. So those are mistaken friends. They're not really our friends. We have to learn to find the proper friends, the true friends, but we have to know that they're bad friends. And so identifying the afflictions is the first step. So a lot of what we've been doing in this course is to help identify them, but we've even talked a little bit about the second difficulty. The second difficulty is counteracting them in some way. And so this means, I think Pema Chodron in her translation of these 3 difficulties, the first one is seeing neuroses as neuroses. We have to kind of get that they're neuroses, that these are not healthy ways of thinking. The second one, she says, is do something different. We have to kind of learn to adopt a different pattern. That's a bit of what we're going to look at again, is how we antidote these by doing something different at those times. The third difficulty is to abolish them completely, to eliminate them. I think Pema Chodron calls this continue doing that. I mean, with the intention that you will continue until they're gone, until you've actually done the work. But this is, the heart of this text is really to help us to identify the afflictions at least, and to begin to counteract them with the intention of the third difficulty of removing them. But I like how, it's not the 3 easies, but that Staples has an easy commercial, right, with the easy button. If Buddhism had an easy button where you could just kind of like press it and, okay, they're gone, that's okay, completely gone. No more delusions. but they're the three difficulties because it isn't easy. It is hard work. And just identifying them is already pretty big. When we can see them coming, and then it'd be like that that one verse in the mind training, 8 verses of mind training, the third one that says, vigilant the moment a delusion appears in my mind, endangering myself and others, I shall confront and avert it without delay. It's like, yeah. But you have to be vigilant. You have to know, like, yeah. You have to keep that one ingrained in your head. Vigilant the moment yeah. We have to find ways of kind of making ourselves much more attentive to what's going on. And, of course, if you don't even recognize these as enemies, if you just think that, oh, there's no problem hanging out with that mind's my friend. Well, no, it's not your friend. But admittedly, it's very difficult. I'm not making this into, something that's that easy to do at all. So this is what we're kind of being exposed to in this text is kind of the main first part of that. The first difficulty is at least being able to identify them, to know that these states of mind are not productive, actually destructive. It's another term that we often use for them, right? Destructive emotions, because there is nothing constructive that comes out of them. And when you get to Tantra, again, this is a sutra text, so we don't even really talk about Tantra in this context. There is a utilization of the energy of the afflictions, but that's it. It's not, it's not like I'm going to go out of control and crazy with my desire and make it into a path. No, you're going to use the energy of that desire that we can feel, that can be separated from the actual affliction. And we're going to use it to overcome the afflictions. So it can't be the affliction itself, or it wouldn't overcome the affliction. It would just feed the affliction. So it's very different when you get to Tantra. Well, actually, it's very, very much the same, too. You're not trying to do anything to increase the delusions, but it's different in that you're going to use the energy that's underwriting them to get to that place. Because it's a very powerful energy. All right, that was the end of the text formally. Now we have number 2, a summary of the salient points and their application to practice. So this is where I want to do some little diversions and kind of put things together that will help us to explore this topic a little bit more. There's several pages of advice. I haven't figured out everything I'm going to do, but I'm just starting what I'm encountering and coming up with some additional things to share. So Yeshe Geltsen says, having thus understood the presentation of minds and mental factors, it is important to know how to use it as a method for subduing one's own continuum. Otherwise, if one takes delight in merely arguing with others, holding forth just to prove one's point, or pedantically listing synonyms, then there is not much purpose. This isn't an intellectual exercise. A lot of things, and there are many things in life that are intellectual pursuits that might be really entertaining, that might be really fun to do, and they aren't going to get you anywhere either. But if you treat this precious medicine like it was that, and do nothing more than develop your own understanding so you can bicker with others or try to force them to see your view or whatever, there's not much point to it. This is medicine, as I said, and that's the term that he actually uses coming up here. So he says, it is just as it has been said in the King of Meditative Stabilization Sutra. Let's read this verse. Although I have explained the good doctrine, if you do not put it into practice correctly after having heard it, then you are like a sick person who clutches a bag of medicines, but is unable to cure his sickness. So if you have somebody who, through their amazing good fortune, they've come upon all these medicines that will remove all the illnesses they might experience or might be experiencing, but they never take them. They just hold on to them like they're so precious. They're so wonderful. Don't I have some great medicines? Well, are they effective? Well, I don't know. I've never used them. Well, they may be great, but the whole purpose of having a medicine is to take it and use it to overcome the illness, use it to overcome what is plaguing us. So if we, hold on to this knowledge, and we don't do anything more with it than have it in our minds, something we can carry around and show off to people or what have you, then we really missed the boat or lost the plot, as Venerable Rabina would say, right? So, it's an interesting analogy. I mentioned this, I think, in the retreat that we did in February when I was talking about analytical meditation. This is why our analytical meditation is so important, because they say, well, one of the points is that you can develop what they call kind of a resistance to Dharma, you know, an insensitivity to Dharma, where like you can keep getting more teachings, but it just nothing really shifts or changes. And they use the analogy in terms of what happens to the mind if we don't integrate the Dharma through analytical meditation, of what happens with leather when they say when you take the hides, the Tibetans would take the hides of the yaks, and they would use the yak butter to soften the leather, to make it very pliable and make it into something that could be used for a variety of things. But they can also take the leather and simply mold it into a sack and put the butter inside it. And when the butter is stored inside the leather, in that sack of leather, the leather becomes very hard and crusty. It becomes a really good container for the butter, but the butter doesn't get into the leather. You know, so it's a good analogy for what happens. We want to be working with putting the butter into the leather all the time, meditating on this stuff, practicing it, you know, doing what we can to implement it in our lives, because otherwise it's just like a big crusty container that's holding all this wonderful knowledge but never absorbs any of it. So this is an important point, is to, you know, different analogies that all kind of, you know, work with this idea of how to make sure that the Dharma doesn't just stay superficial, that it actually goes a lot deeper. Let's go ahead and read the next two verses, the exhortation to the exceptional resolve, this sutra. The bark of the sugarcane has no essence whatsoever. The taste that is the object of joy dwells inside. Through eating the bark, the delicious taste of the sugarcane cannot be gained. Thus, blabbering away is like the bark, and contemplation of the meaning is like the taste. Therefore, abandon joy and blabbering, always be conscientious, and contemplate the meaning. So if you just ate the bark of the sugar cane, again, you wouldn't get the taste of the sugar inside. You have to, you know, get to the pulp of it, the inside of it, where the, you know, the taste dwells. You wouldn't know the sweet of it. If somebody had only chewed on the bark of the sugar cane and said, I don't know what you see in sugar, it's not so great, it tastes like bark, you know? Well, then they've never have an experience of it, right? But if you're actually able to get inside to what the actual taste of the sugar cane is, to taste the Dharma in your own mind, then it's meaningful, then it's purposeful, then it's, you know. And so, as he said, you know, the blabbering away is like the bark. You know, if we want to just chew on bark all day and just blabber about all this and just say this and say that, but never ever apply it to our own lives, well, then that's, you know, not so productive. If we really want to contemplate the meaning, then we have to go deeper. We have to get to the actual taste of the sugar. So be conscientious, contemplate the meaning. You know, and again, that's through analytical meditation. Now, I know it's hard. I mean, you know, deal with my own obstacles around making sure there's enough time for all the things that need to be done in a day and what have you. And many people in the room have busier lives than I have. So, you know, I don't expect everybody has tons of time, you know, for this. But if you can't do meditation on a regular basis, do try to, you know, at least find some time for it, and then try to also make time for retreat. You know, it is good to have periods of time where either you do in a group or on your own, more focused periods of meditation that help you to review what you've been working with. You know, if you're ever sitting there going, oh, I want to go on retreat, but I don't know what to meditate on. Well, just look at what you've studied. I mean, you've got so much there to meditate on. You know, so don't feel, I mean, I know there's almost too much sometimes, but just, you know, understand that it's a process, and that, like, for example, what we did in February, I felt it would be really quite useful once Rachel and I sat down. I think she even suggested initially, and I was like, yeah, that kind of makes a lot of sense. Initially, we thought about doing something on the Four Noble Truths, but to go right to one of the very basic topics of the Lam Rim. Because even though it might be a topic that is quite at the beginning, as we saw in doing the retreat, there's lots of tendrils that connect to various other topics throughout the entire Lam Rim. So this is the value of you know, what we're studying, is that if we have the a desire to really take it further, it really helps. Any bit helps. Just going into one topic in depth will loosen up some of our understanding of the other topics. But if we don't do any of that, then again, we're just going to be blabbering away, or be like that leather bag that just contains all of the richness of the butter of these teachings, but never incorporates them into our minds. Then let's look at that next paragraph. It says, hence, through becoming skilled in the classifications of virtue and non-virtue as explained above, at the time of endeavoring single-pointedly in the practice of the stages of the path to enlightenment, the Lam Rim, repeatedly examine your own continuum in order to recognize the root and secondary afflictions that have been explained above. And if these afflictions arise, having recognized them, immediately overcome them with the antidotes. This is a crucial point. So this is what we're going to, I don't think we have time tonight. It's already about 8:12. What we'll do in the next class is we'll begin to look at this process of understanding the antidotes. I want to precede that with a little talk, and I've done this talk here before, so some of you may have heard it, but it's always good to go back to these teachings again. Also look at what are often called the 6 causes of the delusions, the afflictions, which are also presented in the Lam Rim, that give us a really helpful tool to understand the complexity of things that are affecting the arising of these states of mind. When we went through them, we talked about what they were and kind of, got a real deep analysis of the various facets of them, types of them, what have you. But there are many factors that feed into them. Some of them are very much the same, but they vary from person to person, even as much as affliction to affliction. But it is a crucial point to, recognize them, immediately overcome them with the antidotes. And then it says, it's just as it has been said in engaging in the Bodhisattva deeds. This is from the 5th chapter, which is on guarding alertness. Let's read that verse together. In brief, to examine the state of body and mind again and again is the sole defining characteristic of guarding introspection. So guarding alertness or guarding introspection, it has that how it's defined as is what will kind of watch the mind and be vigilant, attending to what's going on again and again, seeing what is occurring in our body and our mind, so that we can do something different. So again, we do see the role of a lot of these factors, such as introspection, mindfulness, what have you, that need to be involved. But we have to put them to work. It doesn't mean that we just kind of have them and don't do anything on the basis of what we're seeing. Oh, there's my anger arising. Oh, let's follow it and see where it goes, and just go get angry. No. Let's see what's going on, pick it apart, and do something different. Find a way out of it. Let's read one more verse, and then we'll start with Gompawa's quote there. The protector, Nagarjuna, says in Letter to a Friend, know that the mind is like a drawing made on water, earth, or stone. From among these, in regard to the afflicted, the first is best, and in regard to wishing for the Dharma, the last. So if you had a drawing made on water, it doesn't stay very long, right? You can put letters on the water or something, but they're gone. So we want to make the afflictions like that, to where like when they start to come in, they're gone right away. There's nothing, no visible stains from the afflictions. Whereas when it comes to like putting things in earth, well, earth is better, right? Because earth, that you could actually trace out stuff. But what's the problem with earth? We get the rain and we have other elements and stuff and wind, and it's all gone. But if you carve it into a stone, that's a bit more lasting. Maybe there's something even beyond stone that would be better. But nonetheless, this is of the 3, the one that is the deepest impression that will last the longest. So that's what we want the Dharma to be. Something that we can bring inside that actually is there, can be relied upon, can be constant. Whereas the delusions, we want them to just come and go and really not take root at all. So what we're going to do in the next class then is look at what Gompawa says, where it says, in order to abandon the afflictions, you must know the drawbacks, the defining characteristics, the antidotes, as well as the causes for their production. So I'm going to start next time with the causes for their production, because I think it is important to talk about kind of where they come from before we start talking about what do we do when they arise. But I'll share some teachings that I've done in a set of classes that I call The Joy of Letting Go. And I think I even did a presentation on the 6 causes of the afflictions the last time when I was back for 6 months, so here at TNL. So you might have heard these before, but nonetheless, I think it's really useful to review them. So, all right, any final comments or questions? Yeah, Mary?
I love this chart, and I've heard you teach upon this previously.
Uh-huh.
And it would be great if every now and then you bring this out again and
Okay.
bring it up. So it would be wonderful that if I personally maybe could recall these, because I always have to like really dig into.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is such a great tool. So thank you.
Well, good. So for those online, Mary was just saying that she really appreciated this chart that we went through tonight, the 5 paths, the Mahayana path, and how it would be useful if I could, bring it up when I can in other teachings to refresh and review, for everybody's sake, and how wonderful it would be if we all had kind of a greater working knowledge of this. I mean, at one of these times, again, I'd be happy if we do have time before I go, if it turns out that, I don't have enough material that I can kind of throw together. I'm sure there's plenty, but nonetheless, if I do find there's time before I leave, maybe we could just do one night on this. But I've already talked about many of the major points. I don't know if I need to go through a lot more. When we went through ornament, there's a wonderful, in the study guide for ornament, it kind of talks about meditative equipoise and what we mean by the uninterrupted path and the path of release and all these various things. And but I'd be happy to teach a little bit more on them if people wanted that. My last teaching before I go again, April 20, is it the 24th, I think? April 24th.
Very, it was all the way through April. And then for some reason,
Yeah, so next Thursday will be the 3rd. So it'll be the 3rd, the 10th, the 17th, and the 24th. 4 left after tonight, yeah. It's hard to believe. It seems like I just got back. Anyway, you'll have Geshe-la coming, so you'll have a wonderful, wonderful time on Wednesdays going through the Lamrim, middle-length Lamrim. So you have that to look forward to. Oh, were they having some difficulty?
I think they stole something from the drama shop.
You think so?
I'm pretty sure.
Or maybe they just have food offering.
Maybe they did. That would be great.
That would be great. I have food right there.
I hope that's what they did.
Yeah.
Right, maybe we can dedicate.
Okay, sure. All right, page 235. Let's dedicate, again, holding in our hearts, all sentient beings with this dedication that all beings can attain enlightenment through the force of what we've done here tonight. By ripening our own minds, may we become the cause of enlightenment for all beings. And then the second verse where we recall bodhicitta as the means for attaining that result and make a strong aspiration for that mind to grow deeply in our own hearts and in the hearts of others. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish but increase more and more. Page 244, we'll do the prayers for our precious teachers as we recite these 2 verses for His Holiness and Lama Zopa. Think that we're creating the causes for all our spiritual guides, even spiritual guides in other traditions, to have good health and long lives. All these beings who are helping us and others to have happiness, to be free from suffering. May they have good health and long lives, and may we and others never be parted from perfect guides in all our lifetimes. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good. All-powerful Chenrezig Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until samsara ends. You who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers, honoring the 3 jewels, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. And then we can think about those that we're holding in our hearts. We can include those that Amy mentioned that were here earlier. We can include others that we are moved by in terms of their situation, whether it be people in general in the world who are going through difficulties at this time, or individuals that we know who are experiencing obstacles or illness, who are dying or who have died. Make strong intentions for them to benefit from what we have done here tonight. May they be free from their suffering. May they find true peace and happiness. And may all sentient beings find true peace and happiness through our efforts. Okay, thank you all very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you online.